Greetings, fellow duelists, and welcome to Budget Builds, the show where I look at some of the cheapest, most free-to-play decks currently available in Master Duel. I'm Hardleg Joe, if ya didn't know, and today we're looking at Metaphys, one of my personal favorite archetypes. Made entirely of light worm-type monsters, Metaphys focuses on two main gimmicks: banishing everything, and activating effects in the standby phase specifically, allowing you to make a ton of plays during your opponent's turn, but only in the standby phase. It's quirky and weird for sure, and certainly not the best deck by any means, but it's fun to play, and the tools are just powerful enough that Metaphys can sometimes steal games from much more capable decks. Also, you could search Dimensional Fissure in this deck, which makes it a decent anti-meta pick in any format where the graveyard is important. As for its cost, this version I have here is fairly budget, containing only a single mandatory ultra rare with Gold Sarcophagus. You can play more URs if you got the points, and I'll talk about a few of those options later in the video, but all you really need is 18 super rares, which shouldn't be too difficult to get at this point, especially since many of them are contained in a single secret pack, and one of them is like a rogue deck staple that you should probably already have. Oh, and I should mention that none of this counts the extra deck, which is mostly just here for show, but I'll elaborate on that after we do the card by card. For monsters, we're playing all three ofs, including Necroface and the Aloof Floof, and then a whole bunch of Metaphys monsters, including Decoy Dragon, Ragnarok, Daedalus, Nephthys, and Tyrant Dragon. All the Metaphys are like alternate universe versions of existing dragons. It's kind of neat. Anyway, for spells, we've got 3 Left Arm Offering, our 1 Gold Sark, 3 Pot of Extravagance, 1 Metaphys Field Spell, 3 Floodgates, and 3 Ace of Metaphys. Our only traps are 3 Metaphys Ascension and 2 Metaphys Dimension. As I said before, the extra deck is not important and mostly just here so we can use Pot of Extravagance, but the one thing I'll highly recommend is Metaphys Horus, since it's technically part of the archetype and you can get it out of the same pack. Beyond that, I'm mostly just playing stuff I happen to have. In case you're curious, I'll run over it real quick. Coral Dragon and Scarlight are just some alternative synchros you can make. Shaman of the Tenyi and this other Tenyi are worm support, and all the Metaphys are worms. Lila's here because she's light support. And then everything else is just a generic link. We've got Nightmares, Unicorn, Cerberus, the other one, Geonator Transverser, Topological Trisbania, World Gears Agave, Access Code Talker, and Underworld Goddess. As for how to actually play this deck, it's fairly easy in theory, but in practice it can be kind of complicated. You're mainly trying to out-resource your opponent using the 3 high-level Metaphys monsters, Daedalus, Nephthys, and Tyrant Dragon. All 3 of them share a similar effect, where if they're banished, then during the next standby phase, they will shuffle themselves into the deck and then do something. Nephthys lets you search a Metaphys card, Daedalus lets you banish another Metaphys from the deck, and Tyrant Dragon summons a Metaphys from the hand. That last one is particularly important because all 3 of these have a second effect that triggers when they're summoned by a Metaphys monster effect. Tyrant Dragon can attack twice and is unaffected by traps, Nephthys banishes all face-down spell traps, and Daedalus banishes all special summoned monsters. So basically what we're trying to do is banish the opponent's entire board while also searching a few cards in the process, and then just repeat that over and over again. In order to do that effectively, we need to banish as many Metaphys cards as possible, as fast as possible. None of these are once per turn, so theoretically if we banish like a third of our deck, then during the standby phase we can get a whole lot of advantage. Which is why we're trying to banish a third of our deck. In order to do that, we're playing 3 Necroface. If you're unfamiliar with this card, its primary effect in this deck is that when it's banished, both players will banish the top 5 cards of their deck. This is also not once per turn, so if one of those 5 cards you banished just happens to be another Necroface, then both players will banish another 5 cards. Not only does this ensure that you'll have several effects to activate during their standby phase, but it can also screw over your opponent by banishing their combo pieces. Now, in order to trigger the Necro phase, we play Gold Sarcophagus, which allows us to banish it straight out of the deck. In order to get our one copy of Gold Sarc, we play 3 Left Arm Offering, a spell which can search any spell card in the game as long as you banish your entire hand first, which is a cost in most decks, but we kind of want to do that anyway, so it all works out. Now, if you already have the Gold Sarc, you can use this instead to search Dimensional Fissure, which will shut down any graveyard strat your opponent might have, while also strengthening our deck a little bit. In a pinch, you can also use Left Arm to get our one-off field spell. On paper, this thing sounds awful. Its main effect is that you can normal summon a level 5 or higher Metaphys without tributing it, which doesn't really do much beyond occasionally giving you a big beat stick, because remember, these things only get effects when they're summoned by another Metaphys. The true power of the field spell comes from its second effect, which is that your opponent can't activate anything in response to a Metaphys monster effect. Half of my wins with this deck are simply due to the opponent not getting rid of the field spell when they should have. Oftentimes, they'll let it stand, not realizing that it makes everything we have spell speed 4. The standby phase rolls around and they just sit there dumbfounded, wondering why they can't Ash me or use DPE as I search 3 cards, and then summon a monster that banishes their entire field. In many ways, this lack of reading, or lack of understanding, is part of the deck's win condition. Metaphys is a purposely obtuse archetype, full of delayed effects that are difficult to keep track of, and the archetype thrives when people don't know what it can do or when it can do it. This extends past the field spell and onto several other cards in the deck. Metaphys Decoy Dragon, for example, says that if this card is banished, it summons itself during the next standby phase. Also, if your opponent attacks any of your monsters, you can banish Decoy Dragon, and then summon a Metaphys that is banished or in your graveyard. Like a certain Golden Castle, many people will attack while this thing is up, not realizing that the end result is their monster getting nuked off the field. Another misunderstood card is Ragnarok. This is our main normal summon, a level 4 tuner with 1500 attack that, when summoned, banishes 3 cards off the top of your deck. It then gains 300 for every Metaphys card you banished, potentially raising it to a 2400 beater. This is a really good effect for getting things started, especially if it hits a Necro face, but it also has a second effect, which is really good for finishing things off. It says that if this card deals battle damage, you can summon a high-level Metaphys from the deck. So if you can get in for just the tiniest bit of damage, you can proceed to banish the entire board with a Daedalus, or summon a 2900 double attacker with Tyrant Dragon. And really, that's the core of the deck. The rest of the cards are certainly useful, but they don't really deserve an in-depth explanation in my opinion. Like, Aloof Lupine is just another normal summon. Lets you banish a Metaphys from your hand, and if you do, you banish one from the deck as well. Not the best opening play, but it gets your thing started. Ace a Metaphys, meanwhile, is a continuous spell that says once per turn you can banish a Metaphys card from your hand, and then draw a card. Helps you unbrick your hands, and we play 3, because even if you draw multiples, you can just use one copy to discard another. Ascension has a whole lot of text, but the only important bit is that if this card is banished, you can search a Metaphys card. Just more pluses for the plus god. And finally, there's Metaphys Dimension, a continuous trap that says once per turn, if a Metaphys is banished, then you can banish a card your opponent controls as well. It's pretty useful, which is why we play a backup, but it's also kind of slow, even for this deck, which is why it's not a 3 of. You just search it when you can, and hope you don't banish both copies from your various mills. But anyway, that's enough talk. Now is the time for action! Time to show what this deck can actually do, with a few choice replays. Alright, duel number 1 is up against everyone's favorite meta deck, Sword Soul. Although this particular duelist seems to have goals that are beyond our understanding. Their combos start out fairly standard. They've got some Tenyis, and here comes Chi-Chow, so at least one monster negation on board. I'm fully expecting the Baron de Fleur to come riding down any moment now and add an Omni-Negate to the board, but instead of searching Long Wan, they search the other Wan, which turns out to be the wrong Wan because they're forced to just set 3 cards and pass. Not standard by any means, but if those are Blackout and Imperm, then I'm still looking at 3 disruptions I have to play through. I start with Extravagance, of course, and from there it's a game of activating cards with the hopes that I can bait them into using Blackout early. I figure Dimensional Fissure is a pretty juicy target, followed up by a Gold Sark into Necroface, which manages to hit the trap, searching me Ace of Metaphys. I activate it even though I can't draw anymore, and then the field spell, but they still aren't taking the bait. At this point, I just summon Ragnarok since they can't respond to it, and even though they could have negated or destroyed it as I went into the battle phase, they choose not to, which seals their fate. By the time I've attacked into their monk, it's far too late. Ragnarok triggers, Daedalus is summoned, all their monsters are banished, and there's no way they can respond to any of it. I set my trap and end my turn, ready to grind this out for a while, but as their standby phase comes around and they see me searching, they quickly concede. This is an excellent example of how Metaphys win via underestimation. Presumably my opponent could have stopped me several points, but chose not to because they didn't understand what my deck was doing, not until it was too late. For duel number 2, let's look at an opponent who does seem to understand the matchup. This time we're going up against Adamancypators, who've elected to go for a more reserved board. They spent most of their opening turn just getting Block Dragon into rotation using Union Carrier, so even though they only end on 2 disruptions and a bunch of field presence, they have the setup engraved to do a ton of combos next turn, along with a Maxi in hand, which they fire off immediately as a way to just deter me from building a board of my own. I start off with Extravagant, as you do, before clearing their called by with Feather Duster. From there, I'm going to normal summon Ragnarok and use its effect, which hits Necroface, which hits the trap, which gets me the field spell. I activate it, hoping I can go in for an easy board clear, but this duelist sees what's coming and uses their IP to link summon Underworld Goddess before I can attack. At that point, I activate Ace of Metaphys just so I don't lose it, and then banish the rest of my hand to search Dimensional Fissure. Good luck getting that Block Dragon off now. And here we can finally see the Advantage Engine in action. It certainly appears as though I've got nothing, but the standby phase might as well be main phase 3 for Metaphys. I'm going to start by using Daedalus to banish the trap, which searches me another Daedalus. After that, Nephthys goes off, getting me the continuous trap for next turn, followed by Tyrant Dragon, who lets me summon the Daedalus I just searched to banish their entire field, except for Underworld Goddess, who is only affected by targeted effects. Rounding things off, I get a defense mode Decoy Dragon just to shore up my defenses. I started their turn with 3 cards total, and after the standby, I'm sitting on 6, having doubled my advantage in the standby phase. Anyway, they really hate that D-Fissure until they end up wasting their Block Dragon and 2 cards in their hand just to get rid of it. Once the floodgate is down, they try to attack, which allows me to trigger Decoy Dragon and summon my banished Ragnarok for 3 more mills. From here, the game is all but won, it's just a matter of time. Between my regular draws, the draws off Ace of Metaphys, and more effects activating in the standby phase, I'm slowly building back my resources. Despite the fact that they popped a card and destroyed 2 by battle, I'm getting things just as fast as I'm losing them. By the time their next standby phase is over, I'm back to having 6 cards again. Of course, that doesn't stop them. They keep trying to chip away. 1 copy of the trap is spun back into the deck, but not before it can summon a banished Tyrant Dragon. They return the field spell to the hand, allowing them to negate the Decoy Dragon this time, but it's just not enough. Once my turn starts, I can draw an extra card, banish their goddess in the process, summon Ragnarok for 3 more mills, and then attack in with enough damage to summon another Tyrant Dragon. At this point, they're top decking, Well, I've still got 6 cards, and that's before the standby phase. Once they see the banished Metaphys start activating again, they understand it's over and finally surrender. Now, of course, most of your duels with this deck won't be that easy. As I said at the beginning of this video, Metaphys is really good at stealing games when players aren't prepared for them, but once these become a known threat, they are significantly easier to counter. That's why this is a very good candidate for budget builds specifically. They aren't competitive enough to justify spending a ton of UR points on, but if you just want something interesting to try out, or something fun to play with your friends, this is a deck that can fill that role without too much investment. That being said, if you want to spend your money on expensive staples, or if you already have them from other decks, there are a few non-budget options you might want to consider. And I mean exactly a few, because there's not a ton of room in this list for tech cards. Our 3 potential URs here are Dimension Shifter, Honest, and Cross-Out Designator. D-Shifter is essentially D-Fissure, but in hand trap form, granting you a graveyard lock on turn 1, even when you're forced to go second. Honest is a bit old school, but the whole deck is light, and it's unexpected in the modern day. Not only is this great for winning battles, but you can drop it on Ragnarok during the damage step to ensure you do battle damage, thus triggering its effect and summoning a Metaphys from the deck. A Cross-Out, meanwhile, is already a powerful staple card, but it pulls Double Duty and Metaphys since it can be used proactively to banish your own monsters from the deck. The monster that you banish is negated for the rest of this turn, so you can't trigger like Necroface with it, but the rest of your monsters don't activate until the standby phase of next turn, so in here it's just a free combo starter. And that's it, really. I'm sure you could probably fit some other generic ultras in here if you wanted. Ash, Droll, Droplet. These are good in everything, but these are the ones that have specific synergy with Metaphys. And with that, I think I'm going to call it here. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you thought down in the comments. If you do build this deck, I always love to hear about success stories. If you liked the video, like it. If you really liked the video, check out my Patreon, link in the description. And regardless of what you do, good luck and have fun.